Alrighty, so thank you all for joining us today. My name is Jennifer Pate, and I am your Zoom host. Our presenters will be getting started shortly. And this is a reminder to please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation unless the presenter asks you to do otherwise. If you have a question, use the raise hand feature or put it in the Q&A, put it in the chat. Please be aware that this presentation is being recorded and will be available for viewing after the conference. Live transcriptioning has been enabled, and you can turn it off or on using the live transcript feature. You can change the view by clicking on the view button in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. We recommend the speaker view. And at the close of the presentation, I will be putting an assessment survey in the chat box. Please fill out the survey for each session you attend. Now I'm going to turn it over to the speakers so that they can introduce themselves.
Okay, so are we ready?
You're ready to go. It's all
Awesome.
you.
All right. So hello. On your supplemental printout, there's a little bit clearer pictures of some of the things that are going to pop up. We tried to make it as clear as possible when we get there. All right, so each library has the most common questions we get asked, but they don't always spark the most joy to answer. Stuff like, where's the bathroom, and what are your hours? Here, our stats show that our most common question used to be, where's the stapler? And if you happen to stop by our library, it's right there in front of the elevators. But in my experience, most of us don't grow to enjoy our career answering those kind of questions. We like to do things a little more meaningful. When we're able, we enjoy when we're able to use our skills and even the most minimal amount of information and description, but still be able to find the material. Information like, can you help me find a book? It was kind of green, or it had something to do about politics. The joy of the job is when somehow, with pure librarian skill and patience, we're able to find that exact book, and it's available. But then there are times that the worst happens, and the sorrow and desperation settles in as we find out the book is actually not in the stacks where it's supposed to be. These sad stories were happening far too often here in our library, but how could we correct them? Where would we even start? Hello, I'm Renato Medrano, and welcome to our presentation. I'm Head of Systems and Access Services in Texas A&M University-Kingsville Georgia Library, and this is Miriam Sliva. She is Library Specialist 1 and has been spearheading our shelf correction and inventory project. Today, I'll be covering why the project was created. Miriam was going to go over how it's executed, the results, the corrective measures we're taking, and some future plans. My problem-solving process always starts with trying to find the root of the problem. Some of the obvious issues were books being out of order, mismatched labels on the physical books, and Sierra, or our catalog system, also had a lot of erroneous data, but those weren't the root of the problem. After bothering every librarian in the building and watching very closely as students shelf read, I found what the problem is. The root problem is that call numbers are hard to work with, but everyone assumes they're not. The everyone assumes they're not is a key part, and one I want to stress with examples, but we'll get to them. As I'm sure most of you view call numbers as so basic that a few examples will clear up any confusion in using them. Just to be clear, the function of call numbers isn't the problem. Our method doesn't take that into account. So please don't break out the pitchforks just yet while I complain about call numbers for a little while. There are those that have an aptitude for call number interpretation, and there are those that haven't been tested in a little while and still think they know how to do work with them very well. Let's see how this group does. Please put in the chat which of these three is actually in correct order. I'll give you 30 seconds.
So just put A, B, or C.
Yes. I had just thought about typing out all of the text, but this is what it actually looks like when you're on the stacks trying to interpret this call numbers very quickly.
Yeah, which one is correct? Just A, B, or C?
Which one
of
is in the
these?
correct order? The download has a clear version also, because there's a couple of these. All right, we're gonna have to move on. We'll try again in a second. So the correct order in this is A. Correct. All right. Let's try one more. 30 seconds. I really tried to find an area that had books where I could take a long picture like that. Call numbers, at least in our stacks, vary in locations quite a bit. I missed one right there, the coal. It's a barcode is somewhere else. I'm sorry, it's call number somewhere else.
A, B, or C? Which one you think is shelved correctly?
All right, well, that's been over 30 seconds, so we're gonna move on. The answer is in fact B. However quickly it would be possible for us to find the correct, which one, whether the books were in order or not, a computer would be able to crunch through thousands much faster. I have a secret weapon for finding intuitive issues in word and letter number combinations. I'm dyslexic, so all letter and word number combinations are confusing and unintuitive for me. While testing out different methods to improve our student workers' trainings and finding their errors, I realized my error rate was way too high due to the extra processing it takes for my brain since I'm dyslexic. That's when I usually turn to a tool to help me correct that. What makes call numbers so difficult is the fact that they're a terrible combination of letters and numbers designed in a way that isn't intuitive for humans or easily processed by computers. Consider this. Can you understand these letter number combinations? How, with zero context, are you able to so quickly understand that this is a list of dates and what they mean? Humans have been using dates as a means of data for much longer than computers have been around, and their design reflects that. They're built for a human mind to parse and understand. For those that have dabbled in programming, you'll know that dealing with dates and times without a library can be a nightmare. Of course, you know these dates, right? A computer can parse this data and calculate all kinds of information off of it very quickly. The human brain is basically magic. When it comes to pattern recognition, you can make out people's speech even with a terrible connection, with wind, or a lot of people talking at a table. A computer is good at crunching numbers and doing math very, very accurately. One method of dealing with dates relies on the computer's math skills. Unix timestamps are a number that equals the number of seconds starting from January 1st, 1970 as 0, with every second after that adding up to whatever time date that you're comparing it to. So in this instance, the middle date is the first day of the VLC. This is VLC event. And the last one is Christmas morning 2025. That's the number of seconds from 1970. Let's combine the human readable and computer readable in a similar way that call numbers are. Can you read these dates any better? For those who can't do that quick of math, these are the dates. So it's a date plus a number of seconds is the middle one. And the last one is a date minus. And that's how you do dates before 1970, July 1970, but minus seconds. Understanding the complexity of call numbers helped me to realize that our previous efforts that we're trying to correct things, we're just adding more errors. Given our collection size, we didn't have the manpower to spend the time and the care necessary on each book to minimize errors, at least not by hand. We needed a method to rely on computers to crunch through the majority of books and point out potential problem areas. Then a human could focus only on those specific areas, minimizing the errors that could occur when looking at a bunch of correct data. So when you're on the shelves and you're looking through all the call numbers over and over and over, it's easy to get into a trance and to lose track. And then only the most obvious mistakes like a J in the Q's or something would pop out. You're more likely to miss mistakes looking at so many correct bits of information. The 4 major steps of this process are scanning, Sierra processing, Python processing, and correcting the materials. The 2 middle steps require expertise, and the outer ones, scanning and correcting the materials, can be trusted to student workers. The scanning process requires very little training and has a minimal chance of making mistakes, but it has no way of optimizing away the bulk of the time. There's no way of working around that somebody's going to have to go and scan every single book. You can get a little bit faster, and there's certain people that can do it a lot longer without, losing their mind. But there's no way of getting that time has to be spent on that. It's easy enough for a student to be able to start scanning after a couple of minutes of training or attempt. We stress scanning each book. Doubles aren't really an issue. So if you're scanning and sometimes you get distracted, you're helping somebody and you go back, oh man, where was I? It's perfectly fine. Start where you know you've scanned and continue going, because we need to get every book. That's high priority. And then maintaining the order that they are in is also the 2 highest priorities. So doubles aren't a problem. After scanning, we'll have a raw file that has the barcodes of the books in the order they were on that day. This raw file of just all the barcodes, has been the source of a lot of corrections that we're able to find, and then having multiple years of snapshots worth of what the stacks look like has been pretty amazing. Sierra processing requires a higher level of access to Sierra and a bit of knowledge of Creative List. So it's best done by staff or with students who've had a lot of training. In this step, the barcodes gets added more metadata with it, and it's connected with the order that it was scanned inside of Sierra. Even though most of us don't use more than 10% of Excel, because it can do a lot, we still know how to do basic operations and feel generally comfortable in it. So my Python script utilizes this by homogenizing the call numbers in Sierra. It is something that Excel can sort very accurately. Modifying the call number has been complicated since there are so many inconsistencies in our Sierra call numbers with spacing and non-alphanumeric characters. That adds a lot of variation that has to be cleared up. And then the number itself has to be modified into a way that Sierra can sort it quickly and accurately. And this is what they look like after it's had its corrections or homogenization. After a bit of data processing, the script will then point out problem areas that a human will check. This way, a human only has to check a few dozen problem areas rather than thousands of records. Next, misshelved books are marked, and another Python script creates a list of them. So you have the problem areas, a person goes in there and figures out, is this actually a problem area? What's wrong with it? Mark it with some sort of code. And then the Python script collects all of those into a misshelved list. It includes the surrounding books, because you can't find a misshelved book by its call number because it's misshelved. And then it outputs this list for someone to go in and correct. And that is how we did our process. And now we're moving to Miriam.
All right. So we've gone over the why we started doing this and sort of the basics of the how. I want to go a little more in depth into how the misshelved list actually works and why it's so important that even though you could trust this with a student, you really need to send someone out there who knows how call numbers work and how books are organized by their call numbers. And so to do that, we're going to go through a few examples from last year's scan with actual misshelved lists with a few common examples of misshelved books or maybe not misshelved books that we saw. And we're going to play a little game where I want to see how long it takes you guys to spot the problem books in these examples. So here's our first example. If you need to see a bigger version of these pictures or any of the other examples we have, those were also included in the supplemental download that you should have seen on the landing page. For these, we have 5 books here. I just want you to give me 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 for which book you think is the problem book, and just put that in the chat. For the picture books, it's the picture of the books, it's left to right, and for the misshelved list, it's top to bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Which book is the problem? And I'll give y'all about 30 seconds to give me a response. This is a pretty simple one, so I am confident that most of you can solve it, but we'll see.
So deciding what to put on the misshelved list, what data is most important but wouldn't take too much room. I originally didn't put titles, but it turned out
Titles
they
are
were
very
absolutely
Okay, we'll give y'all a few more seconds, see if we can get any more responses in, but at some point I'm gonna have to call it. All right, that's pretty much our time. So as some of you may have guessed, the problem book for this particular example was book number 3. This was a very simple shelving issue. Someone put the PR 2829 in the middle of the PR 2832. I don't know what possessed them to do that, but that's a very simple fix. We just take that book off of that shelf and put it where it actually goes on the other shelves. Here's our next example. This time we have 4 books. So again, just give me 1, 2, 3, or 4 for which book you think is the problem book. If you think there's a problem book at all, you're more than welcome to tell me that there isn't a problem with these books. So again, I'll give y'all about 30 seconds. Just send me your responses and we'll see how good y'all are at reading call numbers. Gonna give y'all a few more seconds. I'm not seeing a whole lot of responses. All right, so as some of you guessed, there actually is not a problem with these with the way that these books are shelved. The computer flagged it as a problem because, as you see here, call number 1 had a year at the end of the call number, and none of the other books in that series did, so it did flag it as an issue. But we, as human beings who can identify patterns and know how call numbers work, can see that there actually isn't an issue as long as all of the books are shelved in the right volume order. So this was an example of no problem and why it's important to have a human go over the computer's results. And here we have our third example. Again, we have 5 books here. So just give me book 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Which book you think is the problem. I'll give y'all about 30 seconds. And this one is a little trickier than the other 2. So just put your responses in the chat and we'll see how y'all do. This one's going to really test y'all's attention to detail.
Volumes were and are continuing to be a test of what I can possibly do with the Python on those.
Mhm. All right, we'll give y'all a few more seconds just to get your responses in. You have to call it in about 5 seconds. All right, so I see the responses I got that some of you pointed out that book number 3 is a problem, and that was very clever to use the missed shelf list, but actually the problem is book number 2. If you were paying attention, the picture of books on the left, book number 2 here, The Vanishing Hitchhiker, this is why we needed titles. The call number on the label says GR 105 B69 1981. But if you look at the call number for that exact same book in the missed shelf list with data that we pull from Sierra, the call number in the catalog is GR 105 B72 1981. So if we're going just based off of what was on the call number label, this book was shelved correctly. But according to what the call number is in Sierra, this book was shelved incorrectly, and that's why the computer flagged it. So what we have here is an issue of a call number discrepancy, and that is obviously a big problem because it means we can't find the book based on the call number because there's not an agreement on what the call number actually is. So the solution here is we need to pull that book from the shelf, take it back to tech services, to cataloging, and determine what the correct call number is and see if it's an issue where we need to correct the record in Sierra or if we need to just print out a new call number label with the correct call number. And those are just a few examples of some real issues that we have seen in our shelves in doing this process. So now that we've kind of gone over the hows and whys of what the system works and what we're doing, I want to talk about the results of us doing these inventory scans, because we've been doing them for a couple of years now, and the results have been absolutely phenomenal in my opinion. One of the biggest things that we've seen is a major increase in our confidence in the catalog and its accuracy as far as what books we have and where they can be found. Our failure rate has gone down from 25% to 3%. And when I say failure rate, I mean the number of times that a student or other patron comes to us and they're looking for a book, but they can't find it. We look it up in Sierra, we get the call number, we get the location, we go to where that book is supposed to be, and it's not there. We count that as a failure. And we've gone from that happening basically 1 in 4 times to 3 out of 100 times, which is an amazing increase in our ability to rely on the catalog to find books. And what we've also seen is an increase in ability to find books that we previously thought were lost. So not only are we more able to find new requests for books, we're able to look back at our past requests for books and see what books were marked as missing or otherwise not in the library and see if we can find those. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that because that has been a very interesting journey. So we've been able to find books that we once previously thought were missing or otherwise not in the library. And those pretty much go into the category of missing books and billed books. Missing, those were books that we looked for, couldn't find. They just get marked as missing in the catalog. They're not available for people to check out. Billed, that's a book that was checked out and we believe to never been returned. But what we found is that when we went into Sierra and we went to create a list and we ran a query to ask Sierra to find books that had an inventory date of 2023 and say how many of those books were marked as missing, how many of those books were marked as billed. And we had quite substantial lists for both of those. When we asked how many missing books had been scanned in the most recent inventory scan, we got a list of 175 books. That's almost 200 books that we thought were not in the library anymore, that were sitting on the shelves the entire time. And so that having that list of books gave us the opportunity to go find those books, put our hands on it, and determine that they were still there. And the way that we did that was we looked at the item records, we saw what the inventory date was, aka the date that it was scanned. Then we went back to those raw scan files that Hanara was talking about earlier to find exactly where it was on the shelf when it was scanned. And that allowed us to go into the shelves, find that book, put our hand on it, confirm, yes, this book is in the library, so that we could update the record to say, yes, this book is available, and not, no, it's gone, it's missing, we don't know what happened to it. For billed books, it was a very similar system. We find the inventory date, we find the scan file, We find the book, we go put our hands on it, and we determine actually this book was turned in and not just lost for years like we thought it was. We can update the record, show that the book was turned in and available, and we can correct any fines that may have been erroneously placed because there were a couple of them. And that's why the inventory date snapshots are so important. So here we have examples from the list of missing books that we found, basically, and you see this is all the metadata we pulled from Sierra, and the big important one here is the inventory date. This was when last time we know for sure someone put their hand on it, and that's how we're able to go back and confirm those books' location and say, yes, it was here. Yes, we can update the record to show the book is here. And again, for the build books, all this information we were able to pull from Sierra just by uploading the raw scan file with the barcodes. We have correct item record number, barcode, and the inventory date being the most important one that allows us to track down their location through those raw scan files. So we talked about why we do it, how we do it, and the big results from it. So now that we have all this great confidence in our catalog, we have all this great ability to actually find the books that patrons are looking for, how do we keep it that way? How do we keep that standard of being able to find pretty much any book people ask us for? How do we prevent it from sliding back down to having an inaccurate catalog? And how do we do it effectively so that we don't have to keep doing a big overhaul of the catalog every few years? We have a few main methods that we use that I'm going to go over really quickly. So the first one is shelf correction, and that is when you take those missed shelf lists, you go out into the stacks and you correct the shelves. You make sure all the books that are misshelved get put in their correct place, pull any books that may have poor call numbers or any other weird things, and double check all the things that may not be incorrect, but the computer flagged as strange. And one of the most important things is that you do these pretty much as quickly as you print them. You don't want to let it sit for more than a day. And the reason I say that is because those scan lists, those provide a snapshot of what the books look like on that day that you scanned them. And the further you get away from the day that you scanned it, the higher chance that there is that someone may go in and maybe take a book out of the shelf or, rearrange things because they don't know where the books go. And so the more risk you have of things moving around, the higher chance it is that you may not be able to maybe find the book that was misshelved because someone checked out some of the books that were used to help you find where that misshelved book was, or maybe things get shuffled and you just can't find what you're looking for. So shelf correcting as soon as you possibly can is one of the big methods we use to make sure our shelves stay in good shape. The second thing we do is the yearly scan. Doing the scan regularly once a year, every year, gives us the best data we can possibly get on exactly what books we have on the shelves and where they can be found. And that is basically what allows us to, if we're looking for a book that was previously marked as missing, or if a patron comes to us with a call number, say, I tried to find this book, but I couldn't find it anywhere. We can look that up in Sierra and say, oh, okay, that book has an inventory date from 2023. That means it was scanned very recently, and there's a high chance it is on the shelf somewhere. We just have to find it. And that also gives us a chance to deliver some potentially unfortunate news if someone is looking for a book and we see that, oh, that book hasn't been updated since 2016 or 2017, or as we have had a few times, has never been inventoried at all. That tells us that that book just might not be there anymore, and we can look at helping them find a different resource for what they need. So that's why it's important to do it every year so that you have that most up-to-date data. And something that I find is also very useful is that it helps you keep track of the actual condition of your books, having to go out into the stacks every single year and say, oh, that book is not in good shape, let's take it down and fix it, or maybe look at ordering a new one. That has been really great for keeping our collection in tip-top shape. The third thing I want to talk about is the book check-in workflow. This is sort of a new thing that we introduced to help reduce the amount of missing or build books that are in stacks not to be found. This is just an extra safety net check that we go through before we put the books back on the shelf to double check that, number one, they have been properly checked in and they have the correct status, whether that be available or live use only. And it also helps us make sure that they're actually being shelved in the correct location. One of the issues I found with the books that have been marked as missing, even though we still had them, was that they had been shelved correctly, just not in the correct collection. So they were shelved correctly in the main stacks, but that book actually belonged in the reference section, or it was shelved in the reference section, but it actually went in our oversized books. So that helps us double check the status and the actual location where that book goes. And those are the main ways that we help make sure that our numbers stay good and don't start backsliding into inaccuracy. And one last thing I want to talk about is our plans for the future to help improve our numbers, because we can always get better. I'm happy with our numbers now, but we can get better. One of the methods that we're hoping to implement soon is a hotspot scan, and that would basically be we highlight the areas of our library where we know that we know get a lot of traffic. People check out a lot of books from them. For us, we have a lot of engineering students at our library, so we get a lot of requests for books from the Qs and the Ts because that's where people need to get information from. And since we know that those areas get a lot of traffic, we know that there's a higher chance that there's going to be shelving errors in those sections. So we can schedule some shorter, more regular scans to help us catch on to those shelving problems before they become bigger problems that we have to solve every year. And that would ideally take a little bit of the pressure off of doing so many shelf corrections in the yearly scan. Another thing we would like to do someday in the future is change our policy for location codes and I-types. In my opinion, we have a lot of unnecessary codes in our catalog for different locations and different I-types, and it makes it really confusing to know exactly where things are supposed to be going and what even exactly they are. I think we have something like 20 different location codes that all boil down to essentially behind the circulation desk. That is far too many. But that is a much bigger project that would require a lot of interdepartmental collaboration, and that's not going to happen anytime soon. So that's a wish list for the future one day. And one final thing that we would like to do that we can hopefully do a little sooner is improving our Python code. What we have was put together to solve the problem initially, but there is definitely some tinkering that we could still do to make it more streamlined and make it more effective to work for people who maybe aren't as technology literate. I know I have some issues working with it, but again, that's going to be a time where we're just going to have to sit down and work on it, and that will hopefully happen soon, but no promises, and it will be great when it does. And I believe that is everything we had to talk about immediately. So if y'all have any questions, now is your time.
So as far as correcting when I made the script, it was meant for me to mess with, so it's not intuitive. And then there were weird problems to solve, like you have the books in the order. Oh, there's a question.
Do you have your Python code on GitHub or something where we can look at it? That is actually something that we were talking about doing in the future as well. Currently, it's pretty local to us, but he was talking
I think once we get the second version and it becomes something that humans can use without a bunch of workarounds, I think it would get there. But like I was saying, when I made it, there were weird problems. Like when you have a list that contains both the correct call number order and the order that they were scanned, it's kind of mind-bending looking at those two numbers and comparing whether it's right or not. So if you sort it by call number, all the call numbers are correct, so it looks right, but you look at the index to see, well, they were scanned in this order, so that means this one's wrong. It's difficult to describe. It is a mind-bending thing. It takes some practice to get used to. I'm not sure if I can Python my way around that one, but right now getting it prepped for Excel to be able to process it correctly takes a lot of effort, a lot more effort than I think is necessary. The Python should do more of that lifting. But at the time, it was such a beta that I didn't have it. And this next round, I've had more people touch it, and there's more likely chance that I can make it to where general people could pick it up and use it without fighting with it as much. What's been fascinating is we started the inventory scan again, and we're already finding weird, like
So it was interesting. We started a couple weeks ago, and basically one of the first scans we did, it so strangely spit out a 13-page misshelved list, which I don't think we've ever had. And it was interesting because this came from an area that is really not highly trafficked, and we were really concerned initially that there might have been some kind of problem with the code. And then we went out and looked and we saw, oh no, all those books really are just crazily misshelved. And when I say that there was a crazy issue, I mean there would be like, 10, 15 books in a row that were shelved incorrectly, all just shoved in the middle of the already correctly shelved books, and we just couldn't figure out why that was, because it's not a highly trafficked area, and I don't think we've ever had that much of a misshelving problem in that area. I believe it was in the H's, which is not something a lot of people go for here. So I'm not sure why. We were curious.
The number was so big, it's like even if somebody was just doing it to be silly, it would have taken work to sit there and move that many books. You'd have to like shuffle things around. So maybe there's another project going on that we don't know. We have to ask around. But that was immediately popped out as like, oh, and that's kind of what happens while you're looking at the data. These different mysteries pop up, and then you start trying to figure out, oh, there's a previous project was being done, and these are like what's left of it, and that's why this has that data. What was also fascinating is this was the only way we would have solved a lot of problems like that. We ran into where there was a book that had all the labels on it and a barcode, but it wasn't in Sierra at all. That's been happening. We found books that have call numbers that are correct but wrong titles. How do you?
Well, we had books that had like a barcode that just didn't match with the actual book. So when you scan the barcode, it pulls up one book record, but that book is not the book that it was attached to, which is part of why it's so important to have the titles and just to determine like, wait a minute, that doesn't match. That's not matching. That's really strange.
And a lot of this stuff would have been impossible to find without having all those points of data to look at all at once and compare. They would have just been there forever. But the missing was just a surprise that popped in one day where somebody brought me a missing and it was there, and then I just did a search and it was just like all of these, and then they immediately found them all. And that was nice to have those just a problem that we didn't even consider, and boom, we solved it in a couple of days. And then Miriam went and scanned areas that have never been scanned, which also popped in, like the GovDocs.
Yeah, we did a scan of the whole government documents collection. That was fascinating because I found so many books in a row that were just not even in Sierra, and I had to like go and collect all that information and take that to our government documents person to say, hey, we have a lot of uncatalogued books here. What's that about?
And then just going to the stacks also points out a bunch of so we're finding bent shelves and stuff that it looks fine until you're there working with it and you realize, oh, okay, that's definitely not okay.
Yeah, we've got some shelves that are a little unstable, but it's nice to be able to look at that and see, oh, that's a problem, and pass it on to.
So as far as sharing my Python, I think the only part that would really have value to general people will be the part that you give it call numbers and it turns them into something that Excel can work with. Outside of that, a lot of it is specific to Sierra, and I don't know how many people use that. And then of course you have to have all your books barcoded, or they have to have some point to start with that you can go one at a time. Because that was my concept. Let's have something that anyone can do, which is scanning, be the bulk of the work, so we can even students do it, and then turn it to more skilled people can do only the problem areas. And that's where all of this came from, is how do I rig that to where we don't need a librarian to be out there to find these problems every minute, because it's just there's not enough of us and we don't have enough time. And so far it's been working. And it's been nice. Scanning is a thing. It is something you have to get, and certain people can just do it forever, and I can only do it for so long. But it's also another mechanism for monitoring the students and knowing, okay, are you actually doing a thing? If you're bringing back after an hour a scan of like 200 books, that's not great unless you're in a weird spot, because there are some that are stuck together and have different problems.
Yeah, but on average, they should be getting at least around 1,000 per scan, give or take, if you send them out there for like an hour.
And then we ran into some weird scanning problems, which has been unfortunate. Our old scanners were running out, and the new ones, which are their direct upgrades, have not been as good as the old ones. So we've had to work around that kind of thing. Losing a bulk of like 2,000 or 3,000 scans is sad. But it has happened, and you just go back and scan it again.
Do we have any more questions about the scanning process or if things we've solved in doing this?
I'm sure many of you still feel that call numbers are not a problem for anyone, but they are a thing. They're not. They're a challenge. They're a challenge. They function very well, but man, I'm also curious if you guys still do you, when you put the call number into your catalog server, do you clean up the call number at all, or do you always put it as is? Because I've had arguments with our tech service department because they put exactly as it is and refuse to change it. And they come with all kinds of strange things, like extra periods, hyphens in weird places, all kinds of weird things that I have to work around now because it's just all over the records.
Volume versus speed versus number.
Yeah.
Versus...
And then dates put in all kinds of ways. Just curious. I'd love to find out if that's common or if that's just the way that it is.
I think another thing that's really interesting as far as like problems that we found that we wouldn't have found without this is that call number discrepancy issue. Like that, there's no way that that would have come up, you know, just in normal looking at the books on the shelf, or even in like students checking out the book. It only becomes a problem when we can't find anything. So database maintenance units used to do this type of cleanup.
Well, Sierra follows its own path. I mean, I don't know if it's a product of Sierra or if it's a product of the way that libraries want to do things. But from what I understand, it's only recent, and by that I mean the last 5 years, that Sierra swapped to a proper database. Like now they're using Postgres, I think. Before it was like a homegrown system, which is just wild to me. So yeah, I mean that's another layer of complication that library databases tend to not follow the general database concepts that everybody else does for whatever reason. And that's another layer of issues to work with. Because when you look at Sierra and you say, what's the call number, it constructs it in its own way. And what it gives is hard to know exactly why it does it, or at least I don't know exactly why it gives what it gives with the output. And it also has a feature where it tries to sort them, but it's not very good at it. Which is because I was like, oh, okay, well, if Sierra can sort it, I can use that to spit it out in order, but it can't. Its failure rate is too high. So now we have special symbols that say, okay, well, this is likely a volume. A human's gonna have to just look through that because our consistency when it comes to volume in our Sierra records is just not there. It's not correct in the MARC record or the record, and in the way it's put at the end of each call number varies too much for me to, like, I could probably write something that would clear up a couple of them, but there's so many volumes up there and they're all done in their own unique, weird way that there's no way for me to fully fix that. So we just put an S and means sight read, like you're gonna have to just go up there and make sure these volumes are in order. Do we have anything other than misshelf and sight read? Is there another?
I think there is another symbol, but I've never seen it used. I think there's a P, but I don't think it ever comes out.
Because I had one for just bring this book to me. Because at the time I had mostly student workers doing this, and it was like, I don't know what's wrong with this. Bring me this book. I have no way of knowing without just looking at it because I know something's wrong. But we haven't had. Well, you guys actually just solved the problems on your own now.
Now we can identify. Wait a minute, that's the wrong call number. Wait a minute, that doesn't match.
Because they weren't doing that. They were just looking and correcting. They didn't. It takes more experience to be able to understand what the problem actually is. Yeah, no.
Okay. Sessions.
Yeah, I guess I should have tried to put something up on GitHub for this, but it's just so messy right now. I feel let me get one more pass to make it work for people in a more expected way.
Yeah, because the way it is now, I can't really use it.
It,
So
it doesn't pop up errors right now. It just sort of just stops, and
Yeah.
then
just tells you there was a problem, but not where the problem was.
which can definitely be corrected, but I haven't had the time. And next round. So, someday I'll sit down for a few days and just crunch through it and make another version that is suitable for, because like now you need to have Python on the computer to run it. But I can compile it and it'll just be a thing that people can just have. And I'll put it somewhere once I feel it's enough for you to be able to take and do something useful versus the mess that it is now.
You have any more questions in the last few minutes? Any curiosities?
Or any special kind of mysteries you've solved recently? Because we're constantly finding, we recently had a donation come in where they were donating books that were ours already.
Yeah, there was a book had our barcode, our call number on it and everything.
And it was checked out, not to the person who donated it.
Yeah, checked out like 12 years ago.
We appreciate your time and
Appreciate your time, appreciate your participation.
I just want to make a note that I have dropped the post-session survey link into the chat. We would appreciate it if you would complete that survey. And big round of virtual applause to our presenters for a great session. Thank you both so much.
thank you. If you have any questions, oh, that's everything we got. Been pretty amazing. And now we can drill down to more specific problems. Like, man, is she right about those codes? We have way too many location codes, way too many item codes. It's a spaghetti, just trying to set, working with spaghetti to try to set a an expected, loan rule. Where is it going to fall? You roll the dice. You just got to try it a bunch of times. One day.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.
Okay.
Hang in there. Thank you, Jeff. We appreciate that.